This is going to be mostly an introduction to the topic, kind of framing the way the rest of the next several weeks is going to go, and a few things like that. We'll also have an opportunity for some questions at the end, things like that. All right? Father, thank you for bringing us here this morning to listen to your word later, to worship, and to learn some things now. I just pray for your blessing on this time. In your name, amen. So from you guys, can some of you guys, just for pre-framing so I can understand, how to explain certain things, what brings you guys here today? Anybody? So you got dragged. To learn how to help him be more healthy.
New subject.
Next topic.
Good topic. I'm getting old. I'm getting healthy.
Sure. Yeah. That's fair enough.
Encouragement in the body.
Sure. Yeah.
I think, we struggle with exercising and doing those kinds of things, and we're excited to see that this was a subject that we're going to talk about on Sunday morning to kind of help encourage us in that kind of, discipline of wanting to be better with our bodies.
Yeah.
You can correct it since I said that.
Yeah. I think that's a great sort of intro. We're here because of stewardship. I don't think I need to convince anyone of that, right? The way that we interact with the world around us while we're on this side of heaven is very much limited by our physical bodies, right? You can't serve in certain ways if I'm not just talking about physically disabled, but it's if you're tired all the time. If you're tired and just don't feel well, how capable are you going to be to serve your church, your family, etc.? And so ultimately, that's sort of the goal of this whole thing. The goal of this class is not to get you all jacked. That's not, if you want to, that's fine. But the goal of this class is not for you guys to come out of this trying to look like me or something like that. I make sacrifices I don't recommend most people make. But you'd all be surprised that I don't do things that are really particularly special. I just do them more intensely. I train 4 hours a week. That's it. And that's what I'm going to recommend you all do later on. Preview in 6 weeks. Okay? You don't have to do much. It really comes down to how smartly you do so, how intensely you do so, and those kinds of things. It doesn't take that much time, but it does take effort. So I hope that you guys can understand what I'm talking about as far as the difference there. I don't invest a bunch of time in my sort of fitness, if you will. Like I said, about 4 hours a week. That's it. I've never really trained more than that, whether I'm competing or in off-season. And some of you might know I'm an amateur strongman and powerlifter. I have a couple state records. I'm not that good. I haven't been on many podiums, but I go as hard as I can go when I'm in those seasons. It's still 4 hours a week. Why? Because that's all I can recover from. And all of my clients, they train 3 or 4 hours a week. That's really all it takes. This class is not going to emphasize training, though. I only have 1 day dedicated to training out of the 9 weeks that we're going to be together. That is a fairly simple topic. It's also not the topic that you guys it's probably not the struggle you guys think it is. Once you start training and do some of the right things, it actually is fairly easy to keep going because it's fun. Once you establish that habit, you start to enjoy it as long as you follow a program that's right for you. The difficulty is in the kitchen. The difficulty is waking up on time and going to bed on time. The difficulty is in protecting your circadian rhythm. The difficulty is not drinking and eating poison. That's a lot more than 4 hours a week of commitment, isn't it? So most of this class will be focused on that, not training. You cannot out-train a bad lifestyle. You cannot. You can't outrun the fork. You can't burn enough calories. What you put into your body is what you're going to get out of your body. So that's why most of this class is going to be focused on lifestyle, not how to train. How to train really is not rocket science. The difficulty is complying with a healthy lifestyle and those types of things. Do you not have a handout yet, Lacey? Does anybody else need a handout? I've got 2 left. Oh, you guys can fight over it. Sorry, Dave. I only made 25.
can share.
So there's not a whole lot of biblical prerogatives around taking care of our bodies, is there? Does anyone know of an explicit command to train? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was thinking of the verse that our bodies are the temple of the Lord.
Yeah, exactly.
You're talking about that.
Yeah. And that's a great starting point, right? We're not commanded specific things. Why? Because there are different times that people have had to do at different eras probably to take care of themselves. The way that we have to exercise faithful stewardship over our bodies is very different than Paul would have had to do so, because he lived in a totally different time that had totally different needs and had different environmental hazards towards his health, wildly different than what we deal with. I don't think he was struggling with eating processed food, for example. And so because of that, like think of the lifestyle of someone in the early church in general, the common man. They would have spent a lot of time outdoors, which is good for you. They would have eaten zero processed foods. They would have had access to almost zero highly palatable foods. All of their food would have been probably more nutritious in general, more satisfying. And to just be a human in those days, you had to move a lot more. He was on his feet a lot. He had to work with his hands. Most people did. Most of us in this room probably spend most of our time indoors for our profession and in our day-to-day lives. We don't have to be outside a whole lot. We can get away with stopping by at the grocery store and getting processed foods. That was like not a temptation that was dealt with in the early church because it didn't exist, which good for them, by the way. And so we have to take different considerations because we're not in that environment any longer. And there aren't specific commands. I'm not going to sit here and make the point that there are specific commands to do everything that I'm going to give you advice to do, because there aren't. This is a discretionary matter. This is partly a matter of conviction. But if you believe that you're supposed to be a good steward of your body, then the next several weeks are what you can do to take care of that. I'm not going to advocate for any type of fad diets, as I call them. I'm not going to advocate for vegan or paleo or carnivore or any of those types of things. For some people, those can have their place when you have specific kinds of medical conditions that can indicate those being effective. In general, I find them to be not good. And so I don't know any of you specifically following those diets, but if you do, I just ask that you remain open-minded as I present the information, because some people feel very passionately about a specific diet that you're into or something like that. Just try to remain open-minded to the information I present when we get to the diet segment. And if you don't like it, then no one's going to force you to do anything. Fair enough? I don't want this to become a contentious matter. I'll present facts to you and information, and if you have questions, ask them. But I don't want this to turn into like a forum for debate or anything like that. There's no sense in that. I'm going to present the information. This is obviously on a take it or leave it basis, but I want it to be as valuable to you as possible and to everyone else, so we're not going to focus on one person's love for a fad diet, if any of you are into that sort of thing. So one item I do want to mention, draw attention to in bullet point 4, we kind of touched on the others. In 2 Timothy, when the reference to self-control, God gave us a spirit not of fear, but a power of love and self-control. Because of the gift of the Holy Spirit, we should have an outsized, compared to the rest of the world, self-control. Right? Is that fair enough? Should we not be more capable than others of self-control because we have been given a gift? And so out of that, we should be the example. And I submit to you that in most churches, there are just as many overweight and unhealthy people as there are in the rest of the world. By stereotype, Southern Baptists are maybe the worst, I don't know. Worse than average in the rest of the world. You laugh because that's a stereotype. And there might be some truth to it, unfortunately. Like that's bad. That's kind of on all of us. Right? It stinks, but we're not Southern Baptist, but we're in the church camp of the potluck people. And even though we don't do potlucks here because Dave's disgusted by them. I know. I said this wasn't going to be a forum for debate. Dave's triggered. So, all I'm saying, though, is that when people walk into a church, a godly church, a lot of things should be different about us. Our love and grace, right? Our service to one another. Our stewardship in all aspects, including our bodies. And that will manifest itself physically. And one of the things that really stinks for people that struggle with in this area of life, of all sins, it becomes pretty much the most visible. You carry it, and it's externally visible. You can have a lot of secret sins, but if you overeat habitually, everyone can see. Kind of stinks. But that's the way it is. That's the way God made us. Why that particularly, I don't know. But it does manifest itself physically, pretty much like no other sin. So that's a bummer, and it's also like should give you this is an opportunity for us to spur each other on. This is an opportunity for encouragement, to hold each other accountable, for dialogue, for open dialogue. Right? We shouldn't walk around fearing to speak about these topics. Stewardship in two areas is often sort of like in our society, people don't want to talk about it. Money and their bodies. Because generally we're ashamed. We don't want people to know where we spend our money because there might be some embarrassment, and we don't want to know we don't want people to know what we put in our bodies because there could be shame and embarrassment. It should not be so, but it is. And so let's move past that. We are the church. We should welcome accountability. We should welcome openness. Psalm 44:3, for by their own sword did they win the land, nor did their own arm save them, but by your right hand and your arm, in light of your face, for you delighted in them. God works through the hands of men to accomplish his goals, through the church. He is chosen right now, in this era, to work through us in the world, for all things. If you are sick and diseased, how effective are you going to be? Not very, right? I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that are advanced in age that lament that, I can't help these people on moving day. I can't play with my grandkids like I used to. I can't run with them. I can't sit on the floor and get back up when I play with them. That's fairly reversible. I've seen women that were over 70 years old turn their lives around and go from being this close to losing their independence, almost losing their driver's licenses, becoming unable to even get in and out of the car unassisted, to being able to sit down on the floor, play with their grandkids, and get back up unassisted, which is remarkable. The body is adaptable. A lot of things are not permanent that happen to the body. I'm not saying everything. We have health problems, we have disease, it does happen. But you'd be surprised how even in advanced age you can recover a lot of function. I'll talk about the health curve a little bit later because it's a concept I think will really help illuminate this. Well, actually, that's the next bullet point, so let's do it. So, there we go. I set myself up. So, as you think of health in general, a lot of people I think tend to think of health as this sort of like bank that you put health into, right, as you do good things, right? That's wrong. Health is something that you're born with. It's an account that you have that you're born with. That's the healthiest you're ever going to be is when you're born, generally. And as you live, you spend it. If you start here, this is birth. It's going to decline from there. You have no choice. This is inevitable. You can choose how rapidly it declines. Okay? So would you rather be the person that does this? Down, 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 dead. Or what the usual experience is that. And those last 5 years really stink as you decline slowly. You don't have complete control over this, right? You might get in a car accident here and you're here. things happen that are out of your control. But as it pertains to what's in our control and our capability to be faithful, this is it. You can't regain this. You can only pump the brakes. Okay? But what you'd probably be surprised is there is a lag, right? So what I mean by that is, think in terms of absolute health and relative health. This is a concept that a lot of people aren't quite familiar with. So absolute health are the curves I just drew, okay? This is how absolutely healthy you are. Relative health is where you appear to be because of the things you've done, but it's not where you have to be. And what I mean by that is, let's say this person decides to turn their life around here. Can they get up to here? No, they cannot. Because they're middle-aged, you really just can't quite get there. But perhaps they can get up to here, right? And then they can do this. That's what the goal of this class ultimately is to teach everybody how to die fast. It is. No, it sounds morbid, but that's the truth. This class is to teach you all to have as high a quality of life as possible, as healthy as possible, have nothing holding you back physically. So that when it comes time for you to go home, you do so as rapidly as possible and you don't languish. That those latter years you can spend sharing your wisdom that you've hopefully gained through years of faithful service to God with those that are around you. How capable of that are you going to be if you spend most of your time in bed because of choices you've made in the previous decades? Think of the opportunity that you could gain versus lose. So that's for the distant future, the here and now though, right? So what are the immediate benefits? The person who finds themselves in a somewhat diseased state, which is the average American, people, I want to clarify too, people walk around thinking they're fine. The average American walks around with some degree of metabolic disease. They're insulin resistant. They have brain fog. They complain that they're tired all the time. This is most people, right? If you're an adult, pretty much everybody will be like, yeah, I'm tired all the time, right? That's just the normal. I'm tired all the time. And there are seasons of life where that's just the case because you have to, because you just had a baby, because you're working a lot of hours, right? I don't say that to say like that can never happen. If that happens, you're being a terrible person. But if you live that way for decades of your life, there's going to be consequences. For example, people that do shift work, on average, lose about 7 years of their life. Why? Because it's just not a healthy lifestyle. Because your circadian rhythm is completely interrupted. And they tend to die of cardiovascular and metabolic disease, which is what kills most Americans, ultimately. And so how do you stave that off? Now, if you're someone that works shift work, there are ways to mitigate that, and we'll talk about that in later weeks. But ultimately, there's a price to pay for all the choices that we make. And one aspect I want to bring up too is that I put there in 6BI, controlled discomfort versus injury pain. What do I mean by that? Who here believes that you're going to be injured sometime in your lifetime? Yeah. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. You're going to hurt your knee, hurt your elbow, hurt your shoulder, hurt your back. It happens no matter what. If you do all the things I say, it's still going to happen. I promise. That's one thing. I can't guarantee many things. I can guarantee that. But what I can tell you is the experience of that injury when you're a more resilient vessel is very different. Okay? Since I've been training, when I get injured, it really only holds me back in the gym. Now, obviously catastrophic things can happen. But in general, usually if your resilience is up to here, if your capability is up to here, when you're brought down to here, you can still walk around and do normal human things. You just might not be able to do certain things in the gym for a while. Okay, but you can still do all your normal people things. That's fine. But when you walk around to here and you injure your knee, now you need, a cane for a while. Now the normal people things really stink. I spent the last 3 months up until almost exactly 5 weeks ago with a hernia. It took me 3 months to get taken care of. None of you guys would have noticed if I hadn't said anything, because walking around here, you wouldn't have been able to tell. If I had not been training, that probably would have been far more severe. But because I had thicker tissues than an average person, my guts were held in a little bit better. That's the honest truth, though, right? When I tweak my knee, it makes it so I can't squat 500 pounds as well. But I can still walk around just fine. Okay? But when you tweak your knee as someone who doesn't train or doesn't participate in those activities, generally what an injury does is it takes away a percentage of your capacity. In general. Not always. I'm not talking about a catastrophic car accident. In general, though, what it's going to do, reduce your knee to 30% function. Well, if 100% is very resilient, that's not a big deal for walking around and, interacting with your family and doing other things. Just not that big of a deal. So that's part of the goal. We should strive to be resilient. The Bible numerous times talks in terms of strength being a positive thing. And I don't teach this class to get you all to go and become competitive power lifters and set records and anything like that. But what I promise each and every one of you who hasn't trained yet, you're capable of becoming stronger than you think. That was my experience, and that's been the experience of every novice client I've ever had. A lot of, especially women. I never thought I could deadlift 200 pounds. Guess what? A lot of women get there like that. That's actually not very heavy for women. I've seen old women do it, in their 70s. Sorry. There's nothing wrong with being old, though. It's a consequence. I don't say that as an insult. But it's true, though. I've seen women your age go from 0 to, I've watched them deadlift in the 200s. It took time. Their progression there is much slower than that of a younger person. Of course, everything's slower when you're older. But think about how much independence a woman like that gains back to be able to do things around the house. How many great-grandparents become kind of what I call the blob grandparent, because they come over, they sit down on the couch, and they just sort of watch and observe. They can't interact much. If they hold the baby, there's a pillow brought over to prop up because their arms are too weak to even hold the baby. So they've lost the opportunity to come over to the grandchild's house and help with the children. They're no longer an asset. They're somewhat of a loved liability, right? But that's the truth of the matter. And how much greater would it be if that person could come, that great-grandparent could come and actually help mom in advanced age to be fully capable physically? That's a greater vision to me. Just because she spent a few hours a week training and made some better diet choices. You don't have to follow a hardcore diet. Some of you in this room have followed my diets. They're not very hard to follow because they're normal food. They're just not processed food. They don't have a lot of sugar in them. But you'll be pretty full most of the time. I don't struggle with food. I haven't. I'm satisfied. I'm fine. Pretty much all my clients report that, even when they're losing weight. Until you get down to really, really, really low body weights, you're capable of feeling fairly satisfied with the right foods. The problem is processed foods are incredibly calorie dense, and they leave you feeling hungry for multiple reasons. Some of them because you're not eating enough protein. The average American eats less than half the protein they should eat per day. And that will leave your body hungry because protein is the one thing your body can't manufacture. You can turn fats into sugars, and you can turn sugars into fats. You can't turn anything into protein. Think about cows. They build a lot of muscle, right? They get their protein from grass. How much grass do they eat per day to get those little bits of protein from all the grass? A lot. Like it's a lot. Pounds and pounds. They're basically eating machines. They have to eat hours and hours and hours per day. Humans only need to eat like an hour a day or so, give or take. That's all you really need. A cow needs to eat whatever it is, like 10 hours a day or something. And they have to regurgitate, reprocess over and over again through multiple stomachs. Why? Because they don't eat meat. We've been blessed with the ability to process meat and protein that gives us a very special ability to not have to eat so often. We don't have to be slaves to food. But it also means you do have to go eat your protein. And when you do, you'll find that you're more satisfied, a lot more satisfied. It's harder to be hungry all the time when you're eating lots of protein because it takes a while to process. There's physical aspects to it. It will sit in your stomach a little longer. It will digest a little bit slower. And a lot of the food cravings that people experience are related to just not getting protein. Because your body knows it needs more protein. But the thing is, you don't really crave protein, right? You just crave food, so you go seek out more food. And the food that's easiest to eat is often just carbs and fats, which, by the way, have their place. I'm not going to be anti-carb or anti-fats in here. Everything has its place. But when you undereat protein, you're just hungry. Unfortunately, hunger doesn't have like much of a specificity to it. All you know is you're hungry, and you just go find food. And the easiest to find foods, the quickest foods, they're junk. And so we'll talk about how to integrate more protein into a diet. It's not that hard. Unfortunately, it's more expensive. But you can pay now or you can pay later. You will pay. You'll pay at the hospital, you'll pay at the doctor, or you can pay at the grocery store. I can control the grocery store. I can figure that out. I would rather pay at the grocery store. But you will have to pay at some point. Like I mentioned, the human body is adaptable. Even the spine is adaptable. A lot of people think, oh, I have a weak spine. At the moment, you might. There's two things that are very adaptable about the spine. One, the musculature around it can be built, and that's where most of the pain comes from. Because the spine is a structure that by itself is unsupported. So what happens when you load a structure that's intended to be supported? You might get pain. That's what happens. If you were to take an MRI of everyone's back in this room, of everyone's spine, you would probably all see things that were shocking to you. There would be absolutely no correlation, this has been studied, there would be zero correlation between where you experience pain, how much pain you experience, and how many deformities that you could find in your spine. People walk around every day with herniated discs. They don't feel a thing. People walk around every day with severe back pain, like very, very severe back pain. You could do an MRI of their spine. It looks almost perfect. No physical deformities to be found. Anybody know why that might be?
Weak muscles.
It's the muscles that support the spine. There's something wrong there.
You said musculature? Yeah. The truth is, I don't know. Nobody knows, and anyone who says otherwise is arrogant. But you guys are on the right track. Muscles seem to fix it. We don't know what causes it. Pain is an experience that humans go through, physical pain. We don't always know why. But we do, by observation, know ways to reduce it. And you guys are totally on the right track. The number one way to reduce back pain specifically is to build the muscles of the back, to make the back stronger. This has a better track record than all drugs and all surgeries, by far. It's been very well studied across large populations. In fact, surgeries have the worst track record. Drugs are actually slightly better track record, but pain meds are something you shouldn't be on if you can avoid, because it's basically poison for your brain. Go ahead.
I have found for back injuries that also what seems amazingly to help is things that take your mind off of the pain. Mm-hmm. Things like hiking or social dance in particular can make back pain disappear in seconds.
Yeah.
Not come back.
Yeah. I actually think that, so I know that that works. I completely agree with you. I think it's working differently than you think it's working. I think it's working because you're moving. Movement. So we'll get into that later. I have a section on that. Movement promotes healing. You shouldn't grind through horrible pain. I'm not saying that. If your knee is messed up because you slipped on the ice, you might need to take a day not moving. Fair enough, right? That's fine. Sometimes things are just that bad. As soon as you can move, like Wyland said, you move. Babying it and laying in bed is a great way to just let inflammation sit, make the injury worse. I had hernia surgery 5 weeks ago. What did I do that day when I got home? I went for a walk, and it was horrible. It was the worst walk ever. I waddled around my property for about 15 minutes because that's all I could take, even highly medicated. I was on drugs, still coming down off the stuff from the hospital and everything. I got home, sat down for a while because I just couldn't take it. And I was like, all right, let's go for a walk. And Emily walked by me in case I couldn't make it. And it was a horrible walk. It was like the worst walk ever. And I didn't walk very far, and I just shuffled around very gingerly, very carefully. And then a couple hours later, I did the same thing. And then the next day, I walked more and continued. I didn't go train in the gym. That would have been stupidity, right? We have to be sane. I'm not saying train through pain. No, that's not something you should be partaking in general. But you do want to move, and you want to push the threshold a little bit if you can. The old advice of, oh, you're hurt, don't move it, don't move that thing that hurts or whatever. It's terrible advice. I had a former coach. He had a great bench press for his size. And on a heavy bench press one time, he tore his pectoral muscle, very pretty bad. And this was like 20 years ago, back when even among people that lifted, the general advice was, oh, stay out of the gym, baby it, don't do anything about it. That's what he did, and he's never been the same. He's never been able to touch those numbers since. Because he developed all this scar tissue, he now has a hole. Like the only way to repair it would be with surgery, and he's not going to do that. So he went from being one of the better benchers you would meet to having a mediocre bench press and chronic shoulder pain because of the way everything's being pulled by scar tissue now. Had he gone through a rehab process of once the bleeding's over and all the bruising's over, you go back into the gym, and what do? You bench the bar. A lot. And that's it. And you put your ego aside, and you slowly work your way back up. Movement is going to be what promotes the healing process, though. What you've observed is 100% true. Taking your mind off, yeah, that's valuable. But the fact that you were moving around, your spine was flexing, that did it more than anything else. You got those fluids moving. The inflammation was able to leave the area. Inflammation is part of the healing process. You don't want it to stay, though. How do you get those fluids moving? You move. The lymphatic system isn't some pump that just runs. It requires your movement. That's why people that lay in bed, CJ knows about this in the hospital, people that lay in bed, what happens to them? They don't. Yes. They get edema. They get full of water, and they get sore, and you start having a bunch of other complications and problems just because they're not moving. Their heart's fine, their kidney's fine, their liver's fine. All their organs would seem to be fine and in perfect operation. But when you don't move, those toxins build up in your body and it just starts causing more and more and more and more problems. So when you're in an injured state, if anything, you should be moving more, if you can. Point B, the athlete is a different kind of biological specimen than a sedentary person. I know a coach that most of his clientele would be seniors, be people over 50, I would say, actually. He calls all of his clients athletes of aging. And that's a mentality I think that everyone should sort of adopt. The point here is not to get you guys to compete. If you want to compete, cool, that's great. Do what I do, awesome. But the real point is you should think like an athlete, because an athlete takes care of their body and considers it a sort of a piece of their well-being. And a lot of us, I think, have generally adopted the attitude in the church of basically abusing our bodies and indulging them. Our bodies are a piece, an extension of everything we do. If you are not well, you cannot serve. If you are not well, how much good are you going to be to your church, to your family? Are you going to be the person that requires others serve you, or can you serve others? And the truth is, the choices we make now, while everyone in this room walked in on their own power, right? Then now is the time to make sure it stays that way. Because it's not once you're here. You can't turn this around once you're at a certain point. It's beyond your power. But you can do a lot before. Metabolic health benefits. Metabolic health, most referring to diabetes. If you eat carbs for lunch and it makes you feel sleepy an hour or two later, you probably have some degree of metabolic disease. Some degree of prediabetes. It shouldn't be that way. Carbs are fuel. If your body doesn't know how to handle them well, then that's the effect that they'll have on you. You can make your body more capable. I have seen type 2 diabetics completely come off of their medication once they fix their diet. Type 2 diabetes in an adult is typically a lifestyle disease. It stinks, but it is often quite reversible. I will say, though, getting type 2 diabetes is just like getting obese. If you've done it once, doing it twice is way easier, right? We all understand that. If you've been a certain body weight, if you've gained fat in your life and you lose it, you can get there again really fast. It's the same way with type 2 diabetes. If you've had metabolic disease and you've sort of rehabbed that disease state, it is easy for you to get there again. Basically permanently. It seems like the longer you go without being in that state, the more resilient you become, but you can always get there again much easier. Orthopedic benefits. A lot of people think in terms of the skeleton as being this sort of like fixed thing. It's like we're made out of stone and it falls apart as we age, and there's nothing you can do about that. That is not the case. A person who engages in, let's say, strength training or something along those lines, we'll say resistance training, how about that? Even a person who's older, your bone density will go up drastically in months, so long as you eat a healthy diet to support it. They've taken cross-sections, scans of persons in their 60s, and the difference between the femur and one that in those that participated, they weren't even doing resistance training. They were like runners. The difference was stark. You could see a well-muscled leg. It was a cross-section of the upper leg. There was muscle. The bone was thick, hardly discernibly different from someone in their 40s or 30s. This is someone that'd be in their 60s. But you take the sedentary person, their bone was, visually, I don't know exactly, but the visuals that I saw, they looked like 15, 20% bone density. These are the types of bones that just break under load. And the muscle was marbled with fat and small. One of the number one indicators of predicting how much longer you have to live in an older person is the time it takes you to do an unassisted sit to stand in a chair. It's very predictable. And this is going to be mostly based on your lower body muscle mass. How much you have left, pretty good predictor. They've actually got it down pretty good. There's a whole study you can read online, you can Google this, but they actually know pretty well if you're within these times and you've got a few years, and it's quite shockingly predictable. What else happens to the skeleton when you train? Well, your joints actually become more lubricated. Do you guys know what non-Newtonian fluid is? Yeah, so some of you do, some of the nerds. Okay, so Newtonian law, right? Anything, what is it? Equal and opposite reaction, right? That kind of thing. Okay. Non-Newtonian fluid is basically the opposite. So if you take a non-Newtonian fluid and let's say a normal fluid. Okay, if I fill a bucket with water and I drop a rock into it, let's make it even more drastic. I throw a rock into it. What's going to happen? It's going to make a bigger splash. The rock will actually enter the water and hit the bottom with greater velocity the harder I throw it, right? It might even still have some momentum going by the time it hits the bottom if I throw the rock hard enough. Non-Newtonian fluid is very different. The harder I throw the rock, the more rigid the water becomes, or the fluid becomes. So you can do this with, what's it called? Cornmeal, right? Yeah, cornstarch. It takes a lot of cornstarch. This isn't like a little bit of cornstarch, but if you mix cornstarch, it's a great experiment to do with your kids to illustrate the point, and maybe yourselves. Fill a bucket with water, put a ton of cornstarch. You're going to mix it for a while, it gets clumpy, things like that. You can insert your hand very slowly into it, and it'll work okay. If you try to punch your way into it, it's like punching a brick wall. You cannot penetrate it. You will not get through. You can put a rock in it and it might slowly sink. But if you take a rock and you throw it, stop. It's going to be a dead stop. You might as well throw it onto concrete. The fluid in your joints is the same way. It's non-Newtonian in nature. Under pressure, it actually provides more lubrication because the viscosity, or sort of thickness, if you will, increases, right? If you're someone who trains regularly, the quantity of the fluid in the joint increases. It's been very well studied and established. So, for example, in your knee, you have the meniscus, which is the cartilage between the joints, or between the bones, I should say. That fluid that sort of permeates the meniscus, do you want a dry meniscus, if you will, or a very lubricated meniscus? You can imagine how much less wear and tear there's going to be. How much more resilient your ACL is going to be when it's sort of more padded by fluids. This is a very crude term to describe it, but a wet ligament is going to fare a lot better than a dry ligament. Think about a rope or something along those lines. You've seen a frayed rope that's been out in the sun and dried and it's breaking apart and brittle. Our ligaments and connective tissues are kind of the same way. But when you don't use them, that's what happens. They lose sort of their fluidity, their elasticity. They become more brittle. They lose the ability to stretch and adapt. Last year, I think in the summer, I interviewed on my podcast a strongman athlete named Troy Bennett. Troy Bennett is quite a physical specimen. He almost made the NFL, not quite. He competes in, he's one of those guys that we've all kind of probably known people like this, that athletically, it's like whatever they do, they're really good at, and it's just obvious that they're gifted. He's that guy. He's that guy that didn't really take football seriously and went all the way through college and played arena ball, and at the arena, semi-pro level, he's got teams trying to pay him all the time and get him in, and he's just okay, I'll show up. And he doesn't even really practice or do anything, and he still does pretty well. And then he also got into strongman, and he'll go months without training sometimes, and then train for a few months leading up to a show and win a national level show. That's the kind of person he is. I hate him. So he's a really cool dude, though. I had a great interview with him. He had it sounds like it was mostly genetic blockages in his arteries, and he didn't realize. He was at a strongman show, a national level strongman show. I think it was like 2021 or something like that. It was just a few years ago. And he just could not catch his breath. He was warming up and he was weak. Something was wrong. He didn't know what it was. And he wound up having a heart attack at the show, a very significant one. So they rushed him in. He didn't die, obviously. But the cardiologists that did scans after the thing that kills you in a heart attack, usually they can get your heart going again. The big danger is basically from lack of blood flow to certain portions of the heart. It's usually a portion of the heart losing blood flow in the smaller vessels. You have tissue death or necrosis. That's really the main danger. That's why people talk about, I lost 10% function. It usually means 10% of the muscle is basically, it turns into, it's fibrosis. It's basically where it goes from being a muscle to just sort of a limp tissue. Okay, so you imagine this is the heart, this section of the tissue, now it's there, it's like a canvas. It doesn't really participate in the pumping anymore. That's the danger. His heart had very significant blockages, no flow to it for a very long amount of time. When he had scans later on, the cardiologist said, your heart has zero damage whatsoever. None at all. Likely, because of his training, specifically in strongman, you end up doing things that bring your oxygen levels very, very low and your heart still has to operate. Adapts to those types of conditions somewhat. Cardiologist said, I think what happened, because normally in a heart attack you lose a lot of function. His career should have been done at that point, had he been a normal person. The cardiologist said he's never seen this happen. He said probably, he described his training routines to him, probably because he operates in such a low oxygen environment sometimes due to his training, his heart had adapted to that condition and became more efficient. He's still alive, walking around today with 100% function. He'd have a stent put in or something, right? So he didn't have this happen again. But today he's fine because of his training. His training to do that kind of thing, you guys don't have to go that hard. It's okay. You don't have to pick up 400-pound sandbags. It's not that hard. And by the way, he only trains about 4 hours a week. Totally doable, right? If he hadn't been trained and conditioned, he would have had to step away from his businesses, his ability to provide for his family, his athletic career, all of it. And he would have become a weak man if he would have survived at all. It was a very significant heart attack. Remember sort of this curve. This isn't just health, this is also your resilience. How much can your body take? When you keep it high enough, the same type of events that would take down another person, you can recover full function from. And going back to my previous point, injury is inevitable. When I injure myself now, typically it's in the gym. Because the things I do in normal life are typically not enough to strain my body. That's great. I would rather it happen in a controlled environment in the gym where the worst that happens is I have to stop training that day. Versus being out helping someone doing something and become a liability. You will get injured. This class will not make you not get injured. Injury is part of the human existence. I promise, I guarantee you will become injured multiple times in your life, just like you have previously. I won't be able to stop that. But you follow what's in this class. What I can tell you is you'll be able to recover better, and that'll affect your day-to-day life a lot less. Make sense? So we have several minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or anything that you also would be useful for me to know about you as we go forward, as I focus our other sessions? I have an outline, but
I find what you said about being injured and not moving rather than moving as a personal experience, I find that, believe that 100%. In 2014, we were rear-ended with our Odyssey by a Hummer. And I was driving, looking, and didn't know it was coming. So I injured my right shoulder a lot. And the physical therapist was like, okay, I'll do this. Don't strain it at home. So, don't do the, laundry, washing dishes, don't move it. So I did what she said. It just got worse and worse. And she wanted me to come in like 3-4 times a week. And she just was wrenching it all over the place. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And finally I'm like, this is crazy. So I stopped going to her and I started using it at home. And every once in a while I move it and go, oh, okay, a little bit too much.
Yeah.
But I have almost all of my motion back.
Yeah. That experience is an experience I've had mirrored with my clients and with myself, actually. 2.5 years ago when we had the flooding, I happened at that time to be training to try to hit some big numbers, and it was going super, super well. And instead of backing off my training when I was running around helping people demolish their homes, which is physical activity I'm not accustomed to doing, so actually kind of a strain on my body just because I'm not used to it, I was stupid and didn't dial back any of my training. I just kept going hard, and I should have taken I should have prioritized one or the other and not done both, right? Because I'm not 20 anymore. I developed very severe glute tendinopathy. So one of my glute tendons was just angry, very angry. And it happened very rapidly and affected a lot of things. It took me about 1.5 years to get function back. During that time, I went through 2 coaches that I hoped would be able to help me with it. Because I already had one, and so we tried to continue on. And he wound up making it slightly better, but it was still pretty bad after almost 1 year. So I got rid of him, hired another one because he had graduated from Duke University with his doctorate in physical therapy. He was a DPT from Duke. Pretty good credentials. He proceeded in the next 4 months to make it far worse than it had ever been, even from the time that I injured it. So I fired him and just was like, all right, well, I'll just do my thing. And it took about 3 months for me to get better. And what did I do? I kept training, but I backed off. Really light, like really, really embarrassingly light weights. When I injured it, I was squatting, I think, 530 something pounds for reps. And I knew I injured it, so I racked it. My training was done for the day. So then I went to squatting like 100 pounds. Very slowly, very carefully, very gingerly. And I did that for a while. Quite a while, because I had to move. But I had to set my ego aside and not try to touch heavy weights.
So you talked about physical resiliency, but you also have mental resilience. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a good, thank you for bringing that up. I have anecdotally noted, and so have my clients, and I think Emily would attest to this, that the discipline of the mind that it takes to eat a healthy diet and to train consistently pours over into other parts of your life, right? If you have this habit and adaptation of taking care of business in the kitchen, in the gym, in the way you go to bed and everything else, how much more capable do you think it makes you at dealing with life stress? Certain things become easier. The disciplined mind is harder to rattle. That's simple. When you're in the gym, and doing all these things, not just in the gym, when you're eating a right diet and all these things, that discipline makes you more disciplined as a person. Just in general. You'll find it bleeds over. Wyland.
An encouraging way to think about this may be that when you think about heaven, you don't have physical problems. You have great health, you have great life.
Yeah.
And in training, whatever kind of training, you do that, you begin to experience less physical problems and greater physical ability. And that's kind of a foretaste of heaven.
That's a good point.
I speak to this personally because we go on vacations to the
You've been to heaven?
Southwest, and when we're there, I do a lot of hiking out in the desert.
Yeah.
Like, 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing the transformation that takes place. Pretty soon you can hike and you feel no pain at all. It's like you're
Yeah.
floating.
Yeah.
Whereas before,
The first day or two.
it's hard. And you feel
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
It is kind of a physical foretaste of heaven.
Yeah.
So that's an encouraging way to think about training.
Yeah, it is. And I like how you brought about, you mentioned those results too. There's something that happens, I think we all understand this through other experiences. There's something that happens in the human mind when you accomplish something, whatever it may be. What I found in the gym specifically, everybody tends to overestimate what they can accomplish in a short span of time. You're probably going to vastly overestimate what you're going to accomplish in, say, 3 months. You're not going to hit the numbers you think you're going to hit. But 2 years in, most people are very astonished how much they're lifting. Astonished. I was. So you guys didn't know me before I started. I mean, I've been training for like 20-something years, but I didn't take it seriously until 2017. At the beginning of 2017, I was 145 pounds. I'm 260 right now, okay? I looked very different. I was very different. When I started training, I just had the thought of like, oh, maybe I'll get to 200 pounds and be a little bit more muscular. It'd be really cool to like deadlift 300 pounds. That'd be awesome. At the time, I deadlifted like in the low hundreds. Who knows? I don't even know. Doesn't matter. I think it was 8 months into training, I got to about, my body weight was just under 200 pounds or about 200 pounds. I squatted 405 pounds. I had no idea that would ever be a lifetime accomplishment for me. And that made me hungry for more. As it should. I'm not saying that needs to be what your goal is. My goal is just lifting heavy weights. When I'm in, like, it's being healthy, obviously, but the side benefit is I just want to move heavy stuff, and I want the numbers to go up and up and up. At a certain stage in life, they won't be able to. I'm in my mid-30s. I probably don't have a whole lot longer of those numbers going up, to be realistic, but I'm going to use the next several years the best I can. It doesn't need to be everybody's goal. In fact, I won't generally advocate it for health purposes because I'm pushing the envelope when it comes to health. So you don't have to do that, but you'd be surprised at how readily most of you could easily get to, let's just say, deadlifting in the 200 pounds for many reps and it not being a big deal. And right now that might feel like a big deal. It's not even for women. Emily does that routinely, and it's fine. Her deadlift PR is in the 300s, I think. And she's like one of the smallest people here. And she's not particularly gifted athletically. She's not. She isn't. No, and I just make that point that like you're not looking at, I'm not talking about a specimen here of athleticism. She's just not. Neither am I. But it shocked me that I could do what I did in that amount of time. And I never thought I'd be someone who's squatting and has capable of squatting and deadlifting in the 600s, which I've done multiple times. I'm looking at trying to get to the 700s. Like, when can I get there? I never thought those were goals that were even possible. I'm not saying that that's something you guys everyone here should be striving for necessarily. But what I am saying is you'll probably be very surprised at what you can accomplish with consistency. It's consistency more than anything else. That trumps everything. That trumps momentary excitement. The habits, the day to day to day. Don't look for progress day to day to day. Look for progress over months and years. It will happen when you take care of the day to day. And part of what I'll be going over is how to integrate some of these things in your life so that it's not a grind eating a diet that's healthy for you. It shouldn't be. We shouldn't be thinking about diet that much. It should be fairly simple. Same thing with all the other habits we'll be talking about. This will be a lifestyle. How to design a lifestyle that supports something healthy so that, one, you don't think about it. We shouldn't be running around every moment of our lives obsessed with this. I don't think about the things I do anymore much. I eat the same foods almost every day. Those of you that have followed my plans do the same. And you probably spend less effort and time thinking about food than ever. Because I don't decide what I'm going to eat anymore. I decided months ago. And I just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Because it's what works for me. And that frees my mind up then to focus on other things that are far more important than what am I going to eat. We shouldn't make decisions about what we're going to eat when we're hungry. When it's 11:30, you shouldn't be like, oh, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go out to eat? Let's go walk over to the fridge and see what's up. I want to help you make that never happen again. Any other questions before we close it? Comments? Cool. Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. This is going to be a lot of fun to talk through. I'll pray and dismiss us, and we can head out. Father, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for everyone's interest in learning to become a more faithful steward. I just pray that you'd bless these next several weeks, that it'd be helpful, beneficial to everyone here. In your name, amen.